Why the fuck isn't my layout working? This always happens. What the fuck is up with this? Yeah. All right. Um, I was going to just be off for night. I need to buy some computer equipment, and a part of this also, I didn't know if I could edit in the whole thing, though. I think I'll save it for another live stream or something, but thinking of having to just keep some stuff out of what I do with some live streams and stuff, not talk about or whatever. Everything, because people are going to take things what I say the wrong way sometimes. But anyways, computer stuff is going up before I get into this here. And this one, I need to leave a shout out to Jesse Michaels. I was about to call a night and everything, and something said, Tado, you need to check, you need to see, you just better look and see that there's something important about UFOs, stuff like that. And Richard Dolan came to mind, and I remember that, and I just happened to take, I'll take a look, just for the hell of it. And again, shout out Jesse Michaels, stuff like that, for doing this video here. I know about Richard, Dolan for, a couple decades at least, if not longer. He's been on History Channel, Ancient Aliens and stuff. He's a real OG. He knows lots about history of UFOs and going back thousands of years and everything. Real OG when it comes to ufology. I saw this, and this is something that I have covered before many times about the first Secretary of Defense, where he could have been killed over knowledge of UFOs and what he knew. He was, I believe, about not the first one, but one of the first ones for. This is from the Truman administration, the first one I should say, that knew about UFOs from 1947 and everything. So, this, and I also want to do something a bit off of something other that I do. This stuff, and let's deep dive into this. I don't know if I can do the whole thing. It depends. And I do this because I want people to know the truth needs to get out there, whatever it is. We all need to know the truth out there. Let's begin. Again, shout out to Jesse Michaels. This is fair use, my own experiences with UFOs and paranormal, etc. I have to put that out there for legal on YouTube, especially. So, anyways, let's go.
Strange, foreign-looking men. He started dipping his fingers into glasses of water all the time and just wetting his lips.
I drink only distilled water.
I love that movie. Baby, I love
Couple big tough Navy guys grab him and throw him the hell out the window. I'm absolutely convinced that's what happened.
And in the 80s, it felt like maybe the U.S. moved from a strategy of secrecy and denial to flood the zone. And flood the zone doesn't mean put out BS. It means put out partial truths and put out a lot.
Right.
People
We've gone over that many times about how there are people that, play out, still put out partial truths and stuff to mislead. I've been over days of Rob Lazar many times.
It emerged from the water, circled their transport ship twice, totally silent. He said there were high winds. This thing should have been bouncing around in the wind. It was rock solid. He writes in his diary at 3:30 a.m. on August 12th, 1825. The night watch reported this orange spherical object rise from the ocean. Let's get down to the fundamental reality here. We are dealing with
one thing in history a lot of people don't know about ufology is that there were supposedly lights / UFOs that people, Columbus saw the Nila, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, etc. They reported seeing lights when they were coming here to America, which is really, really something.
A phenomenon.
Yes.
It is a reality-shattering phenomenon. I do believe that there's a good reason to think that we have been monitored or observed for a long time. It's not that we're being too crazy and too fringe. We're not going out there enough.
I think that's right.
Oh, gangster. Fault.
Different parts of the brain have different activities.
You know that, don't you?
Maybe you should interview me.
Here with the great Richard Dolan, we just did this amazing kind of live show for a bunch of people.
It was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. I told you afterwards, I think you're the easiest person to interview because, I just have to tee you off and then you just go. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. It's a long time coming for me. And maybe what we should start with here in this kind of, private setting is I'm curious to know how you got into UFO research to begin with and who your inspirations are.
Yeah, I have a lot of inspirations in my life. Some in this field, some beyond. This is a story I've told a few times. I don't want to sound like I'm rehashing it, but I want to try to do it fresh. I was always like a very driven young person, and I always felt like there was this very intellectualized destiny that I wanted to pursue. I didn't really know what it would be. I've always been drawn to history and politics. Discovered a real deep love of literature when I was in my early 20s, and that's remained with me. But as a young person trying to make a professional life, I thought, well, I would finish a PhD in history and teach at a university. When I was in my youngest portion of that, I was totally unqualified to try to do what I ended up doing. I was studying German history. My German language was minimal at best, and here I was studying basically the J. Edgar Hoover of Otto von Bismarck's 19th century Germany, back in the 1850s and 60s, a man named Wilhelm Stieber. And I'm like, oh, this is an interesting guy. And I'm diving into his career, and I thought, I'm going to do a dissertation on him. I wrote 150 pages or whatever, and it failed. I was unable to crack Wilhelm Stieber. He's an interesting guy. He blackmailed people. He created a brothel in Berlin in 1870. He would take pictures, all of this stuff.
He literally was
politicians.
A J. Edgar Hoover of German unification.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it was amazing. But anyway, so I bailed out of that.
Totally
when the
different
Berlin
book.
Wall came down, I was
Totally
there. I was in
different.
Berlin during that whole period, 1989. I was trying to wrap this thing up, and it just failed. So I go back to the States, and I left for about 2 years. I was studying at the University of Rochester in upstate New York, and then I went back, and I thought, you know what, my German sucked, so why don't I just do American history, because I know that language. And I went in and I focused on United States diplomatic history, and I did great. I was really, really into it. I was very deeply, and by this time I was in my early 30s, so I was a bit more mature, and I was studying Harry Truman and his presidency, and I was doing a lot of Soviet stuff too, but I ended up studying 1950 national security strategy just before the outbreak of war in Korea. And, I was like, who cares? But that was what I was doing at the time. And I wrote another 125, 150 pages of a dissertation on that, and which I did not finish. So I had 2 unfinished dissertations. And I was in a bookstore, just like a ordinary bookstore one day in Syracuse, New York, and I saw a copy of Timothy Good's very classic work, Above Top Secret.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the subtitle of that book that caught my attention. It was The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. And I'm like, oh, wow. So here we are, it's 1994, so I'm about 32 years old, and I flipped through the book, and I'm like, I know that name. I read his diaries. I know that department. Wait, what? UFOs? What is this? It was this great cognitive dissonance. And I thought, this looks like a fairly serious book. He's got a variety of documents. It looks like his research is at least halfway decent.
Yeah.
And my question wasn't, are UFOs real? My question wasn't like, are there abductions or are there crop circles? I wasn't down that road. My question was simply, even if this was a mistake, like if they were mistakenly interested in this UFO thing or the flying saucers back in the 40s, how come I never read about it in any academic history book, like ever? Even if it was a mistake, like, would you not think that's kind of interesting? You go back to 1947, 48, and I'm reading here in Tim Good's book, like the Air Force and the Navy, like they were totally into this. And in the early Cold War, yeah, that's damned interesting. And so I thought, well, I bought the book and I just went down that rabbit hole. And I thought, I'm going to just spend like 2 or 3 months. And I just want to resolve for myself, like, was this a thing or not a thing? And that was it. And then I figured like I would just leave and go on to my life. And those are my favorite famous last words. So I read Tim's book and it was like, this is a very good book. Started going online, back with the baby internet as it existed, all the news groups. You suck. No, you suck. I'm going to kill you. You know, the bulletin boards as they existed in the 90s. But there were some good UFO bulletin boards. And I went down that. And the next thing I knew, I left the University of Rochester. And it was a real crisis in my life because I'm in my early 30s. I'm like, I've got all this ambition. I wanted to do something. I wanted to teach at a university. But I just lost the belief. I lost the belief in that whole system. I lost the belief in academia. I lost the belief that I wanted to do that anymore. And I was totally obsessed with UFOs. I would remember for an entire year, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking all of these if-thens. Like, if this is real, then was I totally wrong about everything I thought I knew about history? What is the truth then about the Truman administration that I was studying, or Eisenhower, or Kennedy? Like, there had to be this whole subterranean reality that I was oblivious to. And when you think you're a smart person and you think you're well educated, that's the hardest because you want to, like, you've got your ego there. I had my ego. Like, absolutely. I wanted to be like, I'm a smart guy. I think I know everything, but wait, oh wow, I missed this whole thing. That's not easy to admit.
No, it's not when your identity is so tied up in the system. The system's giving you positive feedback until that point. To just accept, that sort of crumbling and finding something new, I think is really tough. But you read something like Timothy Good's, Above Top Secret, and you're like, this is a whole ontology separate from, the reality that I know. And it's so well researched. And it, if you associate, psyops around UFOs with like, American intel, like he's coming up from British Ministry of Defense. He starts with the Battle of Los Angeles, but he goes through like the UK history. And
I'm impressed that you just can roll right through that. I mean, I just tossed Tim Good out there and you're like, yeah.
Well, he's amazing. I mean, you got to, you got to pay respects to your stuff. You got to pay respect. You got to know the these are canonical, I think, works.
Today's episode is sponsored by Incogni.
You ever Google yourself and realize how much of your personal info is just out there? Your address, your phone number, old jobs, even your relatives, all online for anyone to see? There are these companies called data brokers, and they make a living collecting and selling that information without you ever knowing it. They sell it to marketers, recruiters, even risk assessment firms. Worst case, it ends up in the hands of scammers or identity thieves. That's why I started using Incogni. It's a service that automatically contacts over 230 data brokers and demands they delete your personal data. And if your info ends up online again, Incogni keeps going, resubmitting removals on your behalf.
Isn't this what Congress is supposed to do, is to protect us? By doing this? But we have to pay other people to do it for us because they won't.
Have to do anything after signing up. It's just set it and forget it. I also learned something wild. In the US, people search sites are a separate problem. They publish these creepy dossiers on you, property records, family info, even political affiliations. Incogni has a custom removals feature that targets those too. So if you care about privacy, which if you're watching this show, you probably do, Give it a try. Go to incogni.com.
Let me tell you, there's some stuff out there that I've seen about myself, and I think that's one reason why some of the adult stars probably think I have a lot more money than I do. I don't.
American Alchemy and use my code to get 60% off an annual plan. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this episode. In UFOs in the National Security State, you bring up this idea of a breakaway civilization.
Beautiful.
And you have Catherine Austin Fitts, this former Housing and Urban Development employee, who then went on to be a consultant, who's uncovered trillions of dollars worth of fraud.
Discrepancies in accounting, yeah.
Discrepancies in accounting. Yeah, there you go. That's a nice euphemism. So what is a breakaway civilization, and what is the nature of the contact that we're seeing?
Yeah, I haven't talked a lot about the idea of a breakaway civilization in a little while, but I still think it's probably true. And just to give a background, it was a phrase that I coined, I don't know, about almost 20 years ago now. I do a lot of reading of other types of historians, and I was reading a historian named Arnold Toynbee. Some of you know of him. He writes meta-histories of civilizations, and I was kind of in that headspace. And I thought, what is it that actually makes a civilization distinctive and unique? And I thought, well, there's a lot of things. There's like your social structure and your economy and your ideology, your cosmology. And I thought, if you really think about the classified world, especially like assuming like the Roswell event or other crash retrievals happened, you have this very, very deep classified structure that keeps the technology and the science classified away from you and away from me so that we can't really look at it. And I thought, well, what did they do with those breakthroughs in their technology? Well, they're going to learn new things, and they're going to privately maybe patent them and keep them away from the rest of us, and they're just in danger of running more and more away from us. Will they have functional flying saucers one day? Can they go off-world? Can they encounter other beings and all of this? And I thought, well, they're really actually kind of like a separate civilization, one that's broken away from our own. And it was a totally theoretical idea. It still is, I guess, but I think there's evidence for it in a lot of different ways, and so that's what I was talking about. And I think it's a kind of a breakaway group that has its own legal protections and all of that. So I've known Catherine Austin Fitts for many years. I absolutely admire her work. She's a brilliant financial expert, you could say. She served with the first George Bush Senior administration back in the late 80s, early 90s as assistant secretary.
Senior was head of the CIA, something like that. He knew all stuff about UFOs and everything. He knew all about that. He could tell George Bush Jr. stuff and everything. So,
Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She told a story. It should be funny, but it's actually really tragic. She said, when I went into HUD, I said, I want to look at the accounting. I want to look at all the books, and they said, well, no, you're not authorized to see that. She says, the hell I'm not authorized to see that. So she finally got her way, and she said, what happened when they brought in the financial records? She said, the old library carts with all the books on them. She said they wheeled in one after another, filled, stacked with papers, like organized, disorganized. And she's like, God could not pull this apart. She said, you'd need the greatest accountants in the world to undo this god-awful mess. And she concluded, like, this whole system is designed so that it is impossible to audit.
Yeah,
and that was her start.
And
then she goes through 4 years of that, and she had her own amazing, tumultuous journey dealing with analyzing the U.S. government, and then eventually looking into. She wrote a really great paper called "The Myth of the Rule of Law." I highly recommend it. And then she told a really interesting story about, I think in 1998, she was invited by a gentleman named John Peterson of the Arlington Institute. John Peterson was on many, many short lists for DOD Secretary of Defense position for years. And she wrote about this, and he said, we're doing a little get-together of a mini-conference to discuss what it would be like in a world where extraterrestrials are openly acknowledged as living among us. And she said, the biggest regret in my life was not doing that. She was afraid, because at that time, she was looking at connections of the U.S. government and drug trafficking, intelligence communities, and all of this. And she knew that they were after her, and she was afraid that this was like a setup, and so she didn't do it. But I think she came to regret that. But anyway, that's Catherine, and she's come to look at discrepancies in financial doings of the Pentagon and the federal government in general. So back in 2001, Donald Rumsfeld famously, before the House Armed Services Committee in, I think, July of 2001, just before 9/11. Now, the Bush administration were brand new at this time, so in a sense, what he's about to say was no skin off their nose. This was really indicting the Clinton years. He said, yeah, we've looked at the Pentagon records, and there's I think he said 2.3. Well, he kept revising it, but originally it was $2.3 trillion in unaccounted expenditures. He said, if you can believe that, chuckle, chuckle, laugh, laugh in the House. And that became 2.1 trillion on September 10th, and then came 9/11. And then you never hear about this again. That was kind of like gone. A few months later, there's a guy named Dov Zakheim who took over the accounting of all of that. And this is like in 2002, and he's like, yeah, no, we got to figure it out. It's all done. We've just, had to look at the books a little more carefully, and it's down to zero. We have no more discrepancies. And literally, that is what he said. But anyway, so Catherine's been on top of this all these years, and then the question arises, does this mean the money's missing, or is it just you've got accounting discrepancies where you're not getting your books right? I do think a lot of it is that. It doesn't mean that $2.3 trillion got stolen, but it does mean there's a lot of opportunity for money to just go missing. And one thing she has always said is our accounting, our global financial system, she says, is like an open window. It's not a closed system, it's an open system. So, in other words, the money goes out somewhere. And this is where she and I really connected, because she's like, I think that this idea of a breakaway civilization is really right on. And I think some of this money is a lot of this money is going to that, to support and fund and, keep that whole thing secure.
And I believe in her Tucker Carlson interview, she mentions your work. And he's like, where is all this money going? And she goes, well, talk to Richard Dolan. And she goes, space, very vaguely, but like, the implication is almost like they're using this in some of these, some of this off the books UFO research. I believe also that John Peterson's story, where they're doing a simulation of, extraterrestrial contact at the Arlington Institute. This is from a researcher named.
Look, I've talked about these trillions and trillions that's in the new big, beautiful, whatever, bill. And it's just some of it doesn't add up. It doesn't. Sorry, I was thinking about someone that's working right now. And I think you get a hold of her. She likes to listen to me sometimes. She's working right now, but anyways, but all this money is a lot of this stuff is going, to UFO stuff, secret programs. And we don't need the SR-72. That's a bullshit program. The SR-72, the stealth fighters, all bullshit. We have, these UFO programs that could defy space-time, become invisible, change their shape. Off-road and stuff. That's a debate too and everything. People in the government says we have stuff that go off. Ron Lazar said that there's no way that could happen. I think that we do. We have space forces in space. Supposedly from Antarctica in space up there. In other parts, solar system, stuff like that. Supposedly. And, you add up all the stuff when we were going through that. Anybody that was watching. 100 billion here, 100 billion there. Well, just 10 of those programs is $1 trillion. If there are dozens upon dozens of stuff, 100 billion, 100 billion, 10 billion, 1 billion here, there. It adds up. And everything.
Linda Thompson is very active on Twitter. She's great.
We know Linda, yeah.
She said that John Peterson promised to show Catherine Austin Fitts a UFO if she would stop engaging in her research.
I don't think I caught that one. That's interesting, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
Do you think...
By the way,
yeah.
John, I don't know if I should say this or not. John Peterson and his wife, along with James Woolsey, CIA director at the time, and his wife were the people who invited Stephen Greer to a dinner in the early 90s in which Greer has many times talked about this. So I'm not really spilling any beans here. Just kind of interesting connections going on here. And I think you interviewed him.
I did.
Yeah. So I don't know if that ever came up. But.
I don't know if it was an interview, but
I don't know if it was an interview.
So you have all trillions of dollars.
Say it, got something
off
to say.
the books.
Say it.
She's talking
Say
about
it, Jesse.
deep underground military bases and facilities. Do we have documentation that this exists, and how far have we made it? Presumably, some of this might be getting siphoned off. We all probably believe that there's some reality to the UFO story. Is some of this money being spent on reverse engineering UFOs?
Well, all we can say is, I think so, we think so. Is there proof?
So.
That's a hard thing for me to say. I don't know what I can say in terms of proof. There's a tremendous amount of good research showing that we have these so-called DUMBs, deep underground military bases.
Right.
I don't think there's any question that that's real. We all know that there are such things. I used to work kind of closely with a gentleman named Richard Souter, who's done a lot of work on underground base construction. He went through the documentation. I think he made a very, very strong case that even back in the 40s and 50s, the military was looking strong about how to go deep.
I believe that there's some reality to the UFO story. Is some of this money being spent on reverse engineering UFOs?
Well, all we can say is, I think so, we think so. Is there proof? That's a hard thing for me to say. I don't know what I can say in terms of proof. There's a tremendous amount of good research showing that we have these so-called DUMBs, deep underground military bases. I don't think there's any question that that's real. We all know that there are such things. I used to work kind of closely with a gentleman named Richard Souter, who's done a lot of work on underground base construction. He went through the documentation. I think he made a very, very strong case that even back in the 40s and 50s, the military was looking strong about how to go deep. Partially, a lot of it's legit. If they're worried about like nuclear war, nuclear exchange, how do we have secure underground facilities that are impervious to attack? But of course, a lot of other things can happen in those things, not just underground, but potentially in the oceans. If this is
and the thing is, a lot of those ETs were operating there in some of those places before we were there, before we started adding to and everything. So like where tribal lands are, NHI non-human intelligence ETs were already there before we were.
I don't think this is necessarily impossible. If you have the ability to go under the ocean floor, at least in maybe the shelf areas where they're a little more shallow. There's a lot of possibilities here. In terms of proof,
Miles
it's
and miles
difficult. You know,
under
a lot of this stuff is hidden very, very well, hidden in plain sight, perhaps. But to answer your question, I don't know if I can answer it.
I
quite
think all of
precisely.
these are somewhat unanswerable questions,
Yeah.
but you're as qualified as anybody.
What is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
My mind just went here, and it's somewhat of a non sequitur, but
Let me tell you, we do. It's not a question of if. The answer is we do. We have them in the oceans as well. But don't believe anything I tell you. I want you, if you're able to, go out around Catalina Island, go around the Pacific, off the coast of, I'd say, Vandenberg, other places, other, Channel Islands, stuff like that. Hawaii, Puerto Rico, different places, tribal areas. I don't know, national parks have to be careful because it's restricted, of course. I say go out there, do some camping, get out in the water, whatever. You're going to see UFOs and stuff like that. Do your own investigating and look for yourself. Don't believe anything anybody tells you, do your own investigations. You will see stuff that does not make sense, and you'll form, the answer to that.
But mid-century UFO stuff, I remember watching a video of you talking about a letter that FDR had written about a very destructive weapon that America had acquired, and that had come from extraterrestrials. And you thought that was maybe a valid letter. Am I getting this wrong?
Well, I'm trying to think. You might. There's the so-called majestic documents.
Yeah.
One of the people at this conference where we are is Ryan Wood, who's a very good friend of mine. I've known Ryan for years. He and his late father, Dr. Bob Wood, are the curators of the majestic documents, which are kind of related to the MJ-12 documents to some extent. And Ryan and his dad did extensive forensic analyses of those. Those are not just photographic negatives. Those are actual pieces of paper that you can study them. But what you can say with the MJ-12 documents, so they first appeared in 1984. They were probably sent from somewhere near Kirtland Air Force Base, and so we know that's a connection to the notorious Richard Doty. And they were sent to a filmmaker and friend of Bill Moore, researcher, a guy named Jamie Chandray, who had his own very interesting intel connections, I believe. So that's how we get them. Now, the thing is, you set the stage for this. So in the late 70s and the early 80s, the UFO field is being rocked by two major developments. So one was the recently strengthened Freedom of Information Act. So in the late 70s and through the 80s, early 80s, UFO researchers could petition the government for documents, and they were getting thousands of pages of documents related to UFOs. This was a shocking thing. All through the 50s and 60s and most of the 70s, the government agencies, CIA, FBI, military agencies said, look, we don't do this. This is not an interest of ours. We don't really give a damn. And then suddenly thousands of pages of military failed interceptions and CIA memos and FBI investigations, like it's all there. It's like they were clearly lying. So that's one thing. And so from that perspective alone, if you're on the side of the secrecy, you're thinking, are they going to shake the tree just enough and then the right document's going to come out and now we're screwed? Like, is that going to happen? So that was a concern. The other threat to secrecy were the researchers who were engaging into looking in crash retrievals. People like the late Leonard Stringfield, who was the true pioneer of crash retrieval research, but also Stanton Friedman, also Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt and the late Don Berliner and then Tom Carey and all these people. So but in the late 70s, there was a lot of this was just slowly building. We didn't really know a lot about Roswell at that. We're just starting to talk about Roswell, but that was a threat. So these two things. And then in in the wake of all of that, we get these MJ-12 documents, which are allegedly memos to Harry Truman, or letters signed by Harry Truman describing the formation of this organization to manage the UFO secret, referring to crash retrievals, Roswell, and all of this. And so it, you had a lot of skeptics. The late Philip Klass, a man that I think was deeply, deeply connected to the U.S. intelligence community, in my opinion, not just mine, said, well, Truman's signature, that was not his actual signature. It was identical to another one. Well, I think they were using auto pen then as well, actually, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't really know if that matters. But that was supposed to make it like fake. It was a fake. So it was a hoax. New York Times was very happy to support that. But, and there are, legit strong researchers who do think it's a hoax. Robert Hastings, who you mentioned,
Yes.
very strong. And he and I in the past had some disagreements about that. And I very much respect Robert's research, so don't get me wrong there. But he does not believe that they're legit, and a lot of people don't. I don't know. I don't feel that way. I think that I don't know about those MJ-12 documents. I don't really know where I stand on that. But I think when I look at the majestic documents that Ryan and Bob collected, you print them all out. It's this thick. It's like 1.5 inches thick. And you just try reading them sometime. I did this, 20 years ago. I was afraid of looking at this for the longest time, but I thought, all right, I have to read them. I printed them all off. I put them in my own little comb-bound collection, and I just started reading them page after page. And they are highly sophisticated, extremely sophisticated, frankly. And so if you're thinking if this is a hoax, you have to ask yourself, who's creating this as a hoax? All right, you have documents that are through the decades, the 40s and in the 50s and in the 60s, all in a very, seems exactly accurate format. The data that's in them is written in exactly the correct way. So it's not some guy in his basement doing it all by himself, that's for sure. Yeah, there's documents in there, and actually my memory is a little more fuzzy on this maybe than yours at this moment. But FDR did have some statements or letters, I believe, where he expressed an awareness of this phenomenon. There's another letter supposedly from Albert Einstein. Robert Oppenheimer.
He was
Very
also
interesting.
part of Freemasons and stuff like that, where some of them believe in. They know about UFOs. My father, did just a little bit of it, and he got out because it's just a bit weird to him. But depending on who's in Freemason, it goes back to Knights Templar. And so my family's part, has different parts of, different secret societies, stuff like that, and everything. A lot of us come with the knowledge where it seems like we know about the paranormal. We seem to know about UFOs, stuff like that. Some of us, it's like we're already inbred with that in our heads somehow. It's weird, but my father could have been a mathematician, they said, and everything. And Freemasonry has to do with geometrics, geometry, high-profile math, the highest, of course, the tree of life as well, from Solomon and stuff like that and everything. It goes way back, Knights Templar. That's where Friday the 13th comes from. Most people have no fucking idea about Friday the 13th. And that comes from the day the Knights Templar was being destroyed. That's where Friday the 13th comes from. And everything. It's just the destruction of the Knights Templar and everything. They were a threat to the Catholic Church and everything else. And the King of England. Anyways, that's a different video.
Document. Yeah, I mean, those are debated, and I don't spend a lot of my time really fixating on them, but I go back to them every once in a while. And I suspect that there's a lot of truth in them.
I do too. I wonder if
Yeah.
they, the name James Jesus Angleton, of course.
Oh, yes.
So, one of the founders of the CIA, kind of an Alan Dulles acolyte, very deceptive and devious.
He ran U.S. counterintelligence for several
That's
decades.
right.
Several decades, and seemed very involved in the UFO issue. And this is really interesting. He was actually stationed in Italy at the time, or his father was, Hugh Angleton, at the time of the Magenta crash in 1933,
Yeah.
which is really
I only
crazy.
recently learned this. Maybe they get that with you and Malmgren's interview. I think maybe that's where I picked it up.
But there are rumors
course
that the Knights of Malta have something to do with the UFO story as well.
Well, what I'm saying is, yeah, they did because Angleton was there.
And so it's interesting, but I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, that maybe he had something to do with the MJ-12 leaks. And in the 80s, it felt like largely maybe the U.S. moved from a strategy of, secrecy and denial to flood the zone. And flood the zone doesn't mean put out, BS. It means put out partial truths and put out a lot of truths.
That is the way disinformation
That's how
works.
it
This is
is.
something
That's how
I'm really glad you
counterintelligence
bring this up
works.
because what is disinformation? It's not the same as lies.
Right.
So say we're on the inside and we've got this secret to protect and we are afraid, like at some point this is going to come out. So how do we deal with this?
Yeah, you put out some truth and some off stuff to deflect from what's really going on. So, I mean, this is why with some plants and stuff like that, everyone's got their opinions on who is and who isn't a plant. Then, the UFO, UAP stuff. And there's going to be some truth. I mean, that's everybody has to do their own investigating and stuff like that. And find out your own opinion and everything about truth and lies and stuff like that. But
So maybe you put it out, but you sandwich it between things, or you stick at least one thing in there that can be factually demonstrated to be a hoax or a lie. And that's an inoculation. It's like you get inoculated against a disease by getting part of a virus, but it's deadened, and your body recognizes it and can fight it. So it's like you become inoculated against the truth. The truth is put out there, but it's sandwiched in such a way that it's not credible.
I love that. You say you're immune to it. And, it's interesting. I think you have Blue Book where it's just kind of rationalize, explain the whole thing away. The Condon Committee sort of kills it. And then in 74, Hynek seems to flip and they create, UFOs past, present, and future. And from then on, there seems to be this kind of outward openness on the part of the DoD around, UFOs. And in the 80s, it feels like you have Rick Doty doing all his stuff, and you have this sort of flood the zone. Like we're actually going to actively promote and see if and this was peak Cold War era.
I would say yes and no. I mean, officially the Pentagon throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s was like, no, this is nonsense. We don't do this at all. So officially speaking, there was never any, to my knowledge, a genuine promotion of a UFO reality coming from that institution. So I just say that. But there were, let's call them shenanigans going on, and we've learned about Richard Doty, which is a really weird topic for me because I actually met Richard Doty once.
Okay.
He's extremely gracious, genuinely, like he's a nice guy when you meet him. Like,
yeah.
And I know.
I'm sure he's extremely likable. That
yeah,
was
yeah,
his job.
he is. Yeah. So you got to be, but right, that doesn't mean he's truthful, of course.
Yeah.
But I do know for a fact that he has very high respect from within a lot of his colleagues from the intelligence community and from the peripheral, like scientists and people who've worked with him. They like him. They respect him. His own father was, I don't know all the details, but was deeply involved in Area 51 and with UFOs.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And Richard Doty was kind of brought into that as a young officer or young military person. So he, like when he says these days, like he knows it's true, which he says many times. Like I think he's telling the truth on that. He is saying he knows it's true because he does know it's true. In the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and I'm not here to defend this, but he was doing his job. Look, he was in the military. His job was to, I assume, protect certain secrets that were at by Kirtland Air Force Base and the like. Paul Benowitz was very highly intelligent man looking at some of them, and that's what Doty did. So he did kind of lead Benowitz astray there.
Doty also first shows up. This is kind of a little known thing about Doty. In 1977, Ellsworth Air Force Base, Mario Woods has an experience where he is, according to his hypnotic regression, abducted. At the very least, he ends up 10 miles away from Ellsworth Air Force Base with marks on his body, and his partner, Michael Johnson, in a catatonic state. He then goes through this whole debrief session, and guess who's there? Rick Doty. And so it is interesting that I think at least if you're into UFO stuff, the Mario Woods case seems pretty legit to me. It's in a line of all the Robert Hastings UFOs and nukes.
Yeah.
And then you have Doty show up, a couple of years later, and he's definitely psyoping, Benowitz.
And there's a document about Ellsworth there which has been manipulated, and that's been traced back to Doty. So at least I'm pretty sure. So
don't know whether to believe it or not.
The thing is,
psyops.
Well, I'm not going to condemn, and I try not to wag the finger too much at people. Like, it's easy to do that. Everyone's got a job to do.
Yeah.
We have a job to do, which is to get past the BS and to try to understand the truth.
Yeah.
And
well, I always say it's dangerous enough just going for the truth. So don't go ad hominem against there are people who it's obvious that they're sort of counter intel or whatever.
Right.
But it would be one thing if they were clearly leading you astray on a single thing consistently, and you're like, come on, dude, stop doing that or whatever. But I think, some people want you to stop your pursuit of truth in order to just antagonize those counter-intel people or whatever. And then you're sort of losing.
That's right.
You're going to get less close to the truth.
Right.
And you're going to nuke yourself. And it's just so it's like, what do you want?
We've all grown up. We all know the government does all kinds of stuff, and it lies and lies. I started saying this probably before many other people. I've been on this for a long time. Of course, I did a whole study on the history of false flags a few years ago, and
30 years.
So yes, we know there's shenanigans, and they never stop. But is every single thing an op? And what I'm hearing are some people out there, it's almost like there's the implication is the government wants us to believe in UFOs now, therefore they want us to believe in aliens now, therefore it must all be black budget special ops.
That's
and
right.
That the whole alien thing is a ruse, and I'm like, that is so wrong.
Yeah.
You are so wrong if you do that, and you're going down a very incorrect path.
Yeah, well, it's this reflexive, if the government says something, I'm going to put a minus sign against it.
Right.
And so you're going to be totally thought controlled as a result. If you have some, and maybe there is some, it is important to have the hermeneutic understanding of where the government stands on a thing.
But there is no the government. This is the whole thing.
That's true. They're
factions. Everyone's talking
the government. I really disagree with them. The government does not want us to believe in UFOs. ETs, they don't. They just rather go away. Honestly, they just want to keep it to themselves. Congress wants to keep it all secret, keep it behind closed doors of their BS classified briefings. And a bunch of psychopaths, sociopaths that want to keep this secret for religious, political, and money-grubbing reasons and everything. So, I mean, they'd rather just have it go away.
But what you have is, I mean, look, the Pentagon alone is $1 trillion a year. Totally. Is a mountain of labyrinths and fighting bureaucracies. And I can tell you for a fact, you go back to the earliest UFO history, and there's always been factional wars on this subject within the military, within the intelligence community. They don't all agree on policy. They have never agreed on policy. In the 1940s and early 50s, there were factions that wanted openness on UFOs from within that military. We know that. Read the old books by Donald Kehoe. He actually lays it out very well. So that was the case then. It is the case now. And there are people, we'll just mention Lou here again, who within that system who support openness, and there are other people who absolutely do not, and they will fight to the last battle that they can. So that's the fact. And so when you're getting messages coming out of there, it's not like a unified system. It's like who's the faction that's speaking now?
Yeah.
It's a war that is going on,
Who's the one that has
and we
the
need
most
to
power?
understand this.
Yes.
They don't understand that there's a war going on inside our establishment right now, which is in real trouble.
Yep.
Okay? There's a lot of desperation on a lot of fronts, UFOs and beyond. That's going to breed factional disputes galore and hard, battle plans from within to disable the other side.
Totally.
Got to understand that.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. And I think there are probably less outright liars in the space than people trying to front run the truth. So you see disclosure is going to happen. Maybe you have to get in front of it or something. And so
Yeah.
I think there are all sorts of, factions battling on that front. Speaking of secret science, which I agree with you, I think the second you look at this topic for a week plus, you realize that there probably is secret science going on, and there's a real UFO phenomena going on, and those two are two disparate threads. We spoke on the phone once about Thomas Townsend Brown. I don't know if you remember this.
Oh, a little bit, yeah.
And you told me an interesting story.
What the hell did I say? I cannot remember
I
what
talked
said.
about how his work might have made it into the B-2 stealth bomber, and then you had an interesting anecdote.
Oh, yeah, I do, yeah. Okay, so I'll tell this. This is true, yeah. So back in 2008, I was at a conference in, was it in Vegas or in Denver? I think in Las Vegas. So, yeah. And I met with a brilliant, very cool retired Air Force colonel with a PhD. So he had a very strong knowledge of the UFO topic. We had a lot of interesting conversations. I met him, and I met his wife too. She's a really nice lady. So we sat down, and one of the things he said is he was part of the B-2 stealth bomber project. And I said, oh. I was so young, I was so enthusiastic. And I just read a paper by Paul Laviolette,
Yes.
who is a researcher on electrogravitics and had things to say about the B-2 stealth bomber, having incorporated essentially basically principles of electrogravitics to give it a form of lift, an additional kind of lift. So, so I'm sitting with this colonel, and I'm here, and he's closer to me than you are right now. And also we were in a pretty crowded area, so there's people milling about, and I'm not recording anything. We're just talking. And I said, have you heard this paper by Paul Laviolette talking about electrogravitics as part of the B-2? And he was so nice, but at this moment he literally put his hand out like this. Stop! And he looked this way, and he looked this way, and he leaned forward, and he just whispered, "That's bullshit." and he wouldn't talk anything more about it. And as soon as he said that, I thought, all right, that's got to be true.
Yeah.
That's got to be true.
That's a kind of a telltale sign.
Definitely. It was a very interesting moment. I didn't think I would hit a sore spot like that or something that's sensitive, but it was clearly very sensitive.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And as a good segue to your current work on USOs, submersible objects, Thomas Townsend Brown was actually a Navy guy.
Yeah.
And it seems like, he was in the Navy, I think, from 1933 to 42. And it seems like the Navy knew a thing or two maybe about UFOs before the Air Force actually did.
It's totally possible. Yes, absolutely. For example, one USO account, which is actually the account that started me on this book project that I'm in, nearly done. I did the first volume, that's out. 2 and 3 are coming out.
Go get it.
Was an account right by the Aleutian Islands, near a little island called Adak Island, in the summer, of 1945. So it's, the Pacific War was still happening. The European War was done by then. And there was a U.S. transport ship called the Delaroff, which was coming back from Japan to Seattle. And it was passing by, it's still in the middle of ocean, but north of it, the closest Aleutian island was this place called Adak. You can look it up on Google Earth. And according to the primary witness who was interviewed, a man named Robert Crawford, he spoke with a number of researchers, including Dr. James McDonald, who's kind of a legend himself. Anyway, Crawford said, the crew, they saw this. He didn't see the object come from the water. He saw it right after that. But other people did see it emerge from the water. It's a disc-shaped object, about 200 feet in diameter, circled their transport ship twice, totally silent. He said there were high winds. This thing should have been bouncing around in the wind. It was rock solid, totally stable. And then it zipped off to, I think, the east or the southeast so fast. And he said you could see this flash of light as it left. So that's U.S. Navy.
You have just documented 670 something unidentified submersible object cases. You've created this whole database and taxonomy around them. Which case shocked you the most, and why?
There's some very excellent ones. One of the early ones did shock me. It was from 1825, and it was in the South Pacific. So it was a British vessel called the HMS Blonde. There's a naturalist on board. I liken it to, in the movie Master and Commander, there was that great buddy of Russell Crowe, the doctor. And so I think of him as this type of a guy. So he's the naturalist. He wrote a diary. His name was Andrew Bloxham. And he kept a very detailed account of the travels of this ship during this. They actually went from Hawaii to the UK, back to Hawaii, and then down to the Cook Islands and on their way to South America. And so on the return trip from Hawaii, they're passing the Cook Islands, and he writes in his diary at 3:30 a.m. on August 12th, 1825. This is 200 years ago. He said the night watch reported this orange spherical object rise from the ocean at 7 degrees. He said it lit the deck of the ship so bright you could pick a pin off the deck. It then descended back into the water and then rose a second time and then descended into the water. And what's interesting, you could find this as a PDF online. You could look it up. And he, before all of that, this is like just really detailed account of the travel. It's very meticulous. And after that, it's very conventional, very meticulous. Interesting. He published this as a diary at the time. So it's been in publication for 200 years. And there's just this one entry of this. He said it was red hot like a cannon shot. It was, I think, about the size of the moon or the sun, although there was no moon out that night. So there's no confusion with that. And that's it. It's just this bizarre thing. I read this and holy crap. And what I like to pair it with another encounter from 150 years later involving a United States aircraft carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy, which was in July 2nd, 1971. It had just finished doing a series of qualification tests, which they do periodically to stay, current. And we have this account from the man who ran communications at that time. His name is James Kopf with a K. And he wrote about this several times, around 2000, 2001. He spoke to the Disclosure Project in 2000, so he's on record for that. So anyway, this is what he says. July 2nd, 1971, it's 8:30 at night. He's running the comms, and he said, all the inbound communications start spouting gibberish. He's like, what's going on? And then he hears on the intercom some sailor freaking out, screaming, "It's God, it's the end of the world." That's what he hears. Wow. Yeah. So that gets his attention. So he goes out and outside to see a glowing orange, roiling orange, yellowish, reddish. I'm thinking he said it was the size of a beach ball at arm's length, which would be kind of big. It was just above the ship, or maybe off to the side. It wasn't totally clear. He said, I'm standing there watching this for about 20 seconds. A lot of other people. He said sailors were, one guy, he said he had to be sedated. This was a really intense moment. And then the ship goes to battle station, general quarters, battle station. So he had to go back to his comm. And he didn't see it after that, but for the next 20 minutes, the ship was on general quarters. And he stated that the weapon systems went offline. He learned later. And trying to think what else. That was essentially it. So no communications, no weapons.
I've heard many reports of how troops, sailors, fighter pilots, etc., when they see UFOs or something, or people, ETs, either they had to be sedated or given a drug because what has happened has totally shaped them to their core. conscious of reality is totally destroyed their realities. Everything has changed for different reasons and stuff like that. For some, it's a psychological thing, where it was a bad, terrible experience. They've got visions. Some of them get visions, some don't. Some of them are scared out their wits, out their shells. Like I said, to their psychological core and everything like that. So.
And then that ended. And he doesn't know how this departed because he didn't get to see it. But that's his story. And then he actually said by the time we got into port a few days later, the only discussion about this at all was from the ship's captain. He got on the ship's intercom and said, well, as you all know, certain things happen aboard a U.S. naval vessel that have to remain on the vessel and not to be discussed anywhere else. I hope I made myself clear, something like that. And that was it. That was it. So, but what was interesting, made me think of it, is that this was, it sounded like it could have been the exact same type of thing that Andrew Bloxham back in 1825 was describing, this spherical object. And I guess I'll just say, we hear a lot of people talking these days about orbs and spheres. And I have to say and noticed a large number of USO encounters do involve these kinds of orb-like spherical objects, which frequently, and certainly I think in the case of the JFK, engage in some kind of electromagnetic interference. And there's a lot of that. A lot of that goes on. I guess I'll just add, when I finished doing all of these cases and hunting them down in all of these disparate sources and just generally wanting to breathe life into them, most of these were completely forgotten cases. But had a lot of long conversations with my wife, Tracy, about this, and she said, you should really pull out some relevant categories for each of these cases. And I did that. I pulled out each case like 15 different categories, like special effects from there. Was it at daytime or at nighttime? What was the shape of the object and all of this? And what I noticed after looking at all of the statistics, and I put a very amateurish spreadsheet together, but large, but amateurish spreadsheet, but it helped me to see patterns. And I noticed about 10% of all the cases involved EM interference, about 1 out of 10. It's quite a lot. But that percentage is doubled when I looked at the military cases.
Wow.
So there was a 2x likelihood that a military encounter would have electromagnetic interference. I'll just add one other thing about that. In the few cases where people reported missing time with a USO encounter, and there are such, or sightings of a being in connection to a USO, and there's a few of those instances are 4 times as likely to report electromagnetic interference. And when I looked at these numbers, maybe my data sample's small, I don't know, but it's as large as whatever it is. But it makes me think that these EM encounters, they're not accidental. They're kind of a tool, maybe a weapon. Like it's not a random thing. So I'm getting a little off track here, but it was fascinating going into all of these, looking at these trends and these relationships that exist within these sightings. There's an intelligence, and those guys, they know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing.
Do we have a USO crash retrieval program? The thing that comes to mind for me is I think Howard Hughes had it was like a front company for the CIA. It was called Global Marine Corporation, and out of that came the Glomar Explorer.
That's right.
And we know that we've retrieved exotic technology from the ocean floor. So have we possibly retrieved USOs?
I think yes. I believe that's probably a yes. The Glomar Explorer, this Hughes Corporation, they actually recovered a sunken Soviet submarine in the 1970s. And it was an incredible feat because they went down something like 3 miles down to the Pacific floor. They got it. It broke, but they recovered half of it. They actually gave a proper military burial to some of the Soviet sailors that they recovered. So that was an incredible thing. And in terms of recovering discs, I received a communication from a gentleman who was former U.S. Navy. He told me about having attended a conference, not this one, but another excellent one, the International UFO Congress, a really great place there. And he said, you know, I'm hanging outside, and I run into this other Navy guy between lectures, and we're just chatting. And this guy was aboard the USS Nautilus submarine. So that was the first nuclear-powered submarine. And he said, you know, the Nautilus went through a retrofitting, or a refitting, excuse me, in the mid-'60s, which is true. We know about this. And he said one thing that we did is we had like this, we created this hatch, this side hatch, to be able to acquire objects that were discs, unknown objects in the ocean. Now, I mean, the guy like wrote to me, and then he never really was able to follow up with this Navy guy, so he lost that whole thread. So he wrote to me, and we went back and forth on it, and I reported that. It's in my first volume here. I don't know if this is true or not, like, because a Navy submarine is not going to be able to go down to the ocean, the bottom of the ocean floor. That's way too deep. But it can. You know, about 10 or 15% of our oceans are basically ocean shelf. And that might be a different thing, and you might be able to have a submarine kind of work that area, if this is a true thing. Definitely, look, we have a long history. Crash retrievals is a really strong interest of mine personally, and there is no question we've had a number of crash retrievals or recoveries of these UAP. We could do a whole interview on that, frankly. There's just a lot to say about that. Now, those are retrievals that we know about from land. You know, the waters of this world are much more remote to us and much more mysterious, and I don't think a lot of these stories come through. There is one gentleman that I did speak to many years ago. His name is David Noble Whitehorse, and he was, did you and I talk about this?
Yeah, we did.
I thought we did, yeah. So, and did you interview him?
No, but it made its way into the Malmgren thing that I did.
Yeah,
and then I
so.
realized it was actually, you know, I think it was a whole can of worms. But I think it was a year before Malmgren. I think that was actually a little off. It was 1 year, because it wasn't Bluegill Triple Prime. I think it was 1 year before. It was 62. And he's a really interesting character.
He's a great guy. I interviewed him, 15 years ago, and I can't even remember how I found him, but we talked extensively, and he was a member of aboard a U.S. ship called the Finch back in 1962. They were involved in what became Bluegill Triple Prime, part of what is called Operation Dominic. You can look this up. And there's a series of high-altitude nuclear detonations. This is at the peak of, like, we were just going crazy, detonating these massive hydrogen bombs. It was crazy. So he said it was October. This is like right around the time of the Cuban Missile.
Where they found out where electromagnetic stuff was happening, causing blackouts. Everything because of the side effects of these blasts and everything. And then he had problems with UFOs falling out of the sky and stuff like that because of interference and stuff like that. Hold on, I need to get me a drink. I need some sugar or something. Hold on.
Oh, crisis.
Hold on.
October 25th, 1962. They were off a little place called Johnston Island. This is about 500 miles off of Hawaii, out in the Pacific. And he said we did a detonation.
Hawaii just came to
He said we
Hawaii,
often would have bogeys in the atmosphere before we would do a detonation, like that is UFOs, and they would always disappear just before we would detonate the bomb. So they're hanging out, checking it out, evidently. He said on this occasion, so we had to do the detonation, and we were all ordered below deck. This is protocol. And then, to his surprise, some other officer or some other guy comes down and says, you, and you, I want you out now. Out on the, I think, the port side, one of the sides. He says, you are now to face forward. You are not to look to the left. You are not to look to the right. Just look ahead of you and observe. And they're like, oh, okay, whatever. Orders are orders. And so what they see is this long cigar-shaped object zooming by horizontally. And that's all he saw. Then he was doing a cross-train with radar. So later that day or evening, he's talking to the radar guys, and they're all talking about the bogey that was seen to be shot out of the sky. And this is clearly what he saw. And it landed at some point in the Pacific, and they were sending a series of ships to go and see about trying to recover it.
It's fascinating. So actually, I did a little research. I think the Finch might have been an earlier Operation Dominic test. We can workshop this live, or I don't know, anybody could search. But I have a lot of reason to believe that there were anomalous objects that came out of, actually, Bob Jacobs, 1964,
Yes.
Vandenberg case. He was stationed at Johnston Atoll a few months before the Vandenberg case, where he was a photo instrumentation specialist. He was on Big Sur, and he saw UFO wrap around an Atlas 8F missile.
That's right.
And
only 2 years apart.
And he said it was, ubiquitous water cooler conversation that a UFO shoot down was being used as a cover for shooting down a Soviet nuke.
The scuttlebutt at the time by every single person on that island when I got there. This was engineers, technicians, my airmen who had been down there before me. We were told that what happened is the Soviets had launched a nuke into orbit up above us. And JFK told Khrushchev, take that down.
So I found that to be an extremely interesting, another first-hand testimony.
That's wacky.
And this was around Bluegill Triple Prime. So that was this detonation that had happened a year earlier, and then you have the whole Malmgren testimony, which I think is very important as well. I want to ask you. So this begets all sorts of questions around secrecy. Everybody talks about the Air Force. You have in 1947 Twining writing this memo. He's the head of Air Material Command for the Air Force. And he's expressing kind of earnest confusion as to how you...
I remember back then, the general stuff like that. The old ones, they did not like being on camera. They hated the camera. I remember FDR, he told us that, was it? I don't think it's Chester. But another guy, oh God, I can't believe I forget. I used to know all of the generals and admirals, stuff like that, because I did so much on World War II and everything. But he told him, he was like, you got to get used to the cameras, got to get used to that. They want to see you, they want to know who you are, and these guys, they hated politics. They hated politics. All that they want to do is military, and that's it. It's about making the military strong and powerful. They didn't want anything to do with the politics. FDR was the first president pretty much say, you're going to have to get used to this from now on, and it became more political, a lot more political too. I mean, when you get into captain above, you're already pretty much political and stuff, one way or another. But anyways, see how uncomfortable he was in the camera. They like this, as opposed to now, the commanders are more photogenic. They are bred into it, more open to it. Also has to do with the internet and stuff like that, but back then it's like, the camera's like, get that the fuck out. Why is that in my face?
UFO, how UFOs work, but he says they're real and not visionary or fictitious. The Office of Naval Intelligence is the oldest intel organization in the U.S. 1890s. They call it the Silent Service, the Navy. What does
Yep.
the Navy know, and how deeply embedded are they in this issue? Even the reports that came out, I think in 2020 and 2021, were Office of Naval Intelligence led.
Yeah. Yeah, Navy, I think, has been deeply, deeply involved in this from the beginning. It took me a long time, even researching this for years, to fully appreciate just
be
how
honest,
deep they're.
seafarers, a lot of them saw UFOs a lot. It says on their journals, so in their diaries or whatever. It was already heard here. Christopher Columbus and that were search on their way here saw UFOs. It seems like they almost guided them here to the Americas as well. So I mean, this gone on forever. UFOs and maritime, route stuff like that and everything. Sailors and stuff and captains, stuff like that. So.
Involvement was. If you go back and look at some of the original books that were published by people like Donald Kehoe, he's one of the people that kind of was my springboard. He kind of talks a lot about this. Kehoe was a Marine, so associated with the Navy, and so he knew a lot of top Navy brass. He was friends with many admirals, and so he had a real ear to what was going on there, and described quite frequently the rivalry between the Navy and the Air Force. This is very well known. I mean, after the Second World War, the Air Force was the new organization. They had a lot of prestige. They were the only branch that had nuclear weapons. The Navy wanted their own nukes. They eventually got it. There was something around 1949 or so called the Revolt of the Admirals. This was a big political fight between the Navy and the Air Force. So there was all this kind of bureaucratic institutional rivalry that already existed. But it also had to do with the flying saucers, as they were being called back then. The Air Force was getting all the attention. But one thing that Kehoe wrote about, even back then, was like Navy people were having UFO encounters, and the Navy personnel would get really angry because Air Force people would come on the Navy ships and throw their weight around and take over the investigations. And the Navy guys were really resentful of this. The Secretary of the Navy in 1950 was a guy named Dan Kimball. He had his own UFO sighting. So he was flying in duel with Admiral Arthur Radford, who's quite famous. They were flying out from California to Hawaii in 1950. I think it was 1950. Yes. And Kehoe wrote about this. So what happened was Kimball's plane and Radford's plane were both accosted by an object that circled around their aircraft. They're like a number of miles apart. Aliens. But they both had this happen. And as a result, Kimball decided we are going to have our own separate investigation of this. The hell with the Air Force. But at least according to what Kehoe learned, it didn't seem to take off. Didn't really go anywhere. But the rivalry was always there.
I think Ross Coulthart is somewhere here, and he ended up having a conversation with Nat Kobitz, who is Director of Science and Technology for the Navy. And this is the end of Nat's life. I think he was dying of cancer. And he said that he had seen UFO technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it was involved these sort of, bonded metals that were fabricated at the atomic level, and said all sorts of other interesting stuff. So
yeah, I've heard about this. I've not actually listened to it yet, and I'm kind of really excited about doing that.
General Eisenhower is called back to duty, meeting Defense Secretary James Forrestal to discuss many vital questions.
So one other kind of interesting axis around that time, Navy, James Forrestal. So James Forrestal was the Secretary of Navy before becoming Secretary of Defense, meeting a very mysterious, untimely death.
He was murdered.
Yeah,
okay,
that's what I heard.
Let's hear that.
He was absolutely murdered.
Did he have anything to do with the UFO issue?
Maybe, yeah, probably.
Okay.
Probably. Yeah, so Forrestal, this was one of my real pet projects when I broke into this field. And Forrestal was a fascinating guy. He was a very brilliant man, of course, kind of a financial wizard. I think he played football at Princeton back in, as an undergraduate. So then he becomes, after he makes his fortune, he becomes one of those so-called $1-a-year men under FDR for the war, basically to support the war effort. He becomes Undersecretary of the Navy and then Secretary of the Navy at the end of the war. And he he was actually one of these guys who fought against a strong Secretary of Defense position. When we were going through the reorganization in 1947, National Security Act, kind of a total, we're done with the Republic, we're creating the Empire now, people, and we got to reorganize the whole military system. Forrestal fought tenaciously for naval independence under a unified Secretary of Defense. And the real issue was, does the SecDef have budgetary authority over the independent services? That's really where the power is. And Forrestal particularly fought so well that he won that battle, and the Secretary of Defense originally did not have the authority to tell the Army and the Navy and the Air Force what their budget would be. He didn't have that capability, so he was a weak SecDef. And then, irony of ironies, Forrestal ends up in that position as Secretary of Defense. So he, for his entire 2.5-year tenure in that role, one of the biggest problems he had with Truman, we tend to forget this, was that...
Whoa, hold it. Something, look at his face, sunken. Hold it. I don't know if other people can see what
still ends up in that position as Secretary of Defense. So
his arm, look at his arm, the way that he holds, it's like something is wrong. His arm, they don't have that. When you have something like that, something, you're on something or something has you. I don't think people can understand what I'm talking about, but it's like something mentally.
For his entire...
Eyes, something changed him. Something changed his inner mind. Something changed his core. He's not the same as he was when he was younger. Laws changed him. I remember him. It hasn't affected him as much.
2.5-year tenure in that role. One of the big...
Look at that. His arm. Just like he trusts him as far as he could throw him. He also looks like he'd be ready as much to kill him as to hug him. He knows a lot of stuff. Something really changed his head. Something really changed him. Something.
Biggest problems he had with Truman, we tend to forget this, was that
like
Truman wanted to cut the military budget significantly.
Look at his face. Do you see that? Do you guys see? Damn it, I shouldn't even be doing this. Nobody's talking. Oh shit. Do you see that in his eyes, in his face? When I look at something like that, it's like, yeah, I'm ready to kill you. I can kill you if I want. You know that, right? Just about. Doesn't trust it. Looks like he doesn't even like it. I don't know. It's just me. I don't know. Could be wrong. But there's something.
At the same time, he wanted to expand U.S. military presence globally, so it's kind of a disconnect there. And the Joint Chiefs were saying, like, $15 billion, are you out of your mind? Which, of course, that's nothing today, but at the time, it was also not very much. They wanted like $30 billion, I think. And Forrestal sided with them, but he was kind of stuck because Truman's just make it happen. And so they had a very unhappy relationship over that. Then, at the same time, we have the flying saucers making their appearance in the military world and in the American psyche. It's like we're talking about it. And this was something that he was definitely very aware of. It was impossible not to be. I read Forrestal's published 2-volume diaries, which were published after his death. We'll get to his death in a second. And of course, there's not a mention of UFOs or flying saucers in there. But anyway, so what ended up happening? So Forrestal and Truman, their relationship became rocky. Truman's up for re-election in 1948. Everyone's like sure he's going to lose. Thomas Dewey, Republicans, sure win. And Forrestal, bad move, had met with Dewey, and it got out, and Truman was pissed, like, you betrayed me. But anyway, so
Dewey's
Truman wins,
president.
Shocks the world.
Dewey was supposed to, Dewey was supposed to have won. It was an upset. It was an upset when Truman won as president. In the papers, it had Dewey winning over Truman in a landslide. I also remember that Lord McCall, who was with Humphrey Bogart, the great Humphrey Bogart. Oh my God, when movies were movies, when stars were stars, good stuff, unlike now. Anyways, she was, Laura McCall was in that picture. Yeah, Truman holding the paper there when Dewey wins president landslide. It was actually Truman that won, so let's see, re-election 1948.
Sure, he's going to lose. Thomas Dewey, Republicans, sure win. And Forrestal, bad move, had met with Dewey, and it got out, and Truman was pissed, like, you betrayed me. But anyway, so Truman wins, shocks the world, tells Forrestal shortly after that, you're done. I think in January 49, he says, you're out. You're out.
FDR did not like Truman either. There was a time when the presidents did not like their vice presidents. They just got them in to get themselves in. The other side in there is pretty much, unlike today where things are a lot more extreme. Back then, it was, you had a person that was different than, your agenda, your affiliation, etc. So even, FDR was not for Truman and stuff like that. And it's crazy. Look at presidents, how different they were back then.
They give, but, publicly they give Forrestal this nice going away ceremony. It's like, you're a great American and all this stuff. And this is the crazy thing. So this is January 49. Forrestal leaves this ceremony and gets into a limousine. And in the limousine is the Secretary of the Air Force, Stuart Symington. Now, Symington was like one of Forrestal's major political enemies. Forrestal was convinced, and I bet he was right, that he was being followed. Symington was probably involved. There was a journalist back then named Drew Pearson who was writing stories about Forrestal, and people were noticing all throughout this time that Forrestal seemed like he was unraveling. He started developing these weird...
I say, in a change you can see that. Look at his faces. I get chills actually seeing this, because I can see when a person has changed from human to almost non-human state. I've been there myself. And if you've been there, you can see it in others, you can see it in their mind's eye and everything. My God, what the fuck? It's like he's not even human, he's just a shell. It's like something else grew inside of him and took over his shell.
Nervous tics. He just said, I'm being followed by strange, foreign-looking men. He's looking around. He's very paranoid. He started dipping his fingers into glasses of water all the time and just wetting his lips. Like there's some weird thing going on with him. So he gets out of this meeting and he goes into the limo, and there's Stuart Symington, who they hate each other. And all that we know is that Symington said, I want to talk to you about something. No one, to my knowledge, knows what actually happened on the limo ride back. They were going back to Forrestal's office But what we do know is that when Forrestal got out of that limo, he goes into his office, closes the door, and he's shut in there for like hours. Finally, his secretary knocks on the door, and she opens the door, and he's sitting in his chair. He's just staring ahead at like this blank wall, and he's repeating one sentence.
What is it?
You are a loyal fellow. So
he was like hollowed out.
He's out of it. So they start making the phone calls, and suddenly the team comes and they collect him, and they fly him down to Hobie Sound in Florida, and he's there for I think 6 weeks, maybe less than that, a few weeks. It's been a little while since I got into all of this. At one point down there, he apparently, we're told, tried to hang himself with his belt. That failed. They bring in a army psychiatrist by the name of Menninger. I think William Menninger. He was kind of famous.
That's misspelled there. Stupid people.
And then one of his friends, Robert Lovett, a future Secretary of Defense himself, goes to visit him. And apparently Forrestal's first words were, "Bob, they're trying to kill me." So then they fly him back up to Maryland, to the Bethesda Naval Hospital there. I think it's 16 floors. Against all the advice of the attending physicians, they take him to the top floor. Because they're like, if this guy's suicidal, that's the last place you should take him. He should be on the ground floor. But no, national security people said top floor. So he's sequestered there.
They only do that when he knows things. They're afraid that you're going to blurt out secrets that they don't want people to hear. And UFOs and stuff like that is definitely something that he was hollowed. He was hollowed out. Something else took him. I could see it. If anyone knows what I do about how people could be hollowed and stuff like that, it totally transformed and everything. He totally was. I saw it. He's a shell. Almost like an empty vessel. I mean, part of it was there, but he's almost devoid to his part of his soul still dead, but something else had taken control of him because I could see inside of him. I could actually see inside of him and see something else had taken over. Wow.
He's visited by a few interesting people. We all know Truman, yeah. Oh, and one thing they certainly did is they grabbed his diaries. Like, that's not making it out. They expunged the shit out of those diaries before they were ever published. But Truman, Forrestal's successor, Lewis Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, young guy named John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Let me tell you, Lyndon Baines Johnson was also called good. He did also control blacks as well.
And who else?
Lyndon B. Johnson is evil mother effer in my opinion. Evil ass motherfucker.
Forrestal's own brother, William, was not. Did see him, finally was able to see him after a long, long time. Forrestal was never allowed to see his spiritual advisor, a chaplain by the name of Sheehy.
That's the thing. That makes no sense. Why wasn't family allowed to see Forrestal? Only if they want to keep things quiet. Only if they're afraid of what he was going to say. And they put him in national security floor instead of psychiatric, psychiatric patients. That says everything. That says everything. Because if they're suicidal, you keep them psychiatric. You give them pills. You give them medicine. You give them shots. You have them national security. It's only for secrecy, keeping them quiet. And you said they're trying to kill me.
He, father, he. What guy in a hospital is not allowed to see his priest or rabbi or spiritual or minister?
Right.
Like, that's kind of weird, right? Forrestal wasn't allowed. So anyway, he's there for, I think that's 6 weeks, yeah. And he's getting better. He develops a friendship with one of his Navy corpsman guards. Like, they're in 8-hour ships outside his door, you know. And one of them, they just strike up a really good relationship. And Forrestal says, you know, when I'm out of here, I want you to be my assistant. So this is really a good thing. So he's thinking about the future. But his brother William, was it William or Henry? Yeah, Henry.
Yeah.
He is angry that the Navy's not letting his brother out.
Yeah.
Oh, and meanwhile, over in that whole last week, Forrestal's main attending physician was out at a conference. So the hen house has no protection here. Really. So anyway, Henry calls the hotel, the hospital, and he's staying, I think, at the Watergate Hotel.
Okay, wow.
Is that where it was?
Yeah.
Or that's where it was. Anyway, he calls them, and he says, if my brother is not out by tomorrow, God damn it, I'm going in, and I'm going to raise holy hell, and you're not going to like what I have to say. So that was May 21st, 1949. And on the night of May 21st, going into the 22nd, that's when James Forrestal did his 16th floor bungee jump out the window. So what happens? So what we know is that Forrestal's Navy corpsman, who he was pals with, who had the midnight shift, somehow went AWOL and was gone. No explanation. New guy comes in. And at 1:30 to 1:45, we are told, he opened the door to check in on the secretary, on Forrestal, and he sees Forrestal up in his bed, and he's reading a book, and looks like he's taking notes, this type of thing. He asked, would you like a sedative? And this is according to his testimony. Forrestal said, no, I'm good. And according to the replacement corpsman, he said, the next time I went in there, he was gone. Well, he'd gone out the window. So what apparently the official story is that Forrestal is transcribing an ancient Greek play, The Death of Ajax. It's actually really amazing stuff. But
Sophocles, right? Or who is it?
That's Sophocles, yeah. That's a Sophocles one. And he stops transcribing in the middle of one word, nightingale, I think. He stops in the middle of it and decides, apparently, that he must kill himself at this very instant.
Wow.
So he according to the official story, gets up, and I think there's a shower where he could have done this more easily, but he didn't do that. He leaves his room, goes out into the hallway. There's a little window there behind a radiator. You know, the radiators that were ubiquitous back in those days. And he takes his bathrobe cord, ties it very tightly around his neck, ties the other end, not so tightly, I guess, around the radiator. And think of this is a weird way to kill yourself. Tries to hang himself outside the window?
Yeah.
No suicide. I don't think anyone's ever tried to do that.
No.
So, according to the official story, the cord slipped off the radiator and he just plunges to his death.
Right.
Now,
Obviously,
let's look a little more realistically here. How difficult would it be? I mean, Forrestal had been very athletic as a younger man, but he was small.
Yeah.
A lot more frail.
Yeah,
wasn't really doing great.
Different, yeah.
Couple of big, tough Navy guys or big, tough young guys grab him and throw him the hell out the window.
Right.
Then tie the radiator after the fact. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty...
I'm absolutely convinced that's what happened.
Yeah.
And then this is 14 years before the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So you have a country that is, they're going to believe every single thing the military says.
They would kill people a lot more to keep UFOs and other stuff a secret, not just UFOs but other things. And that's what they believe they're doing. I know that one guy that was around the Roswell crash and stuff like that, they may threats you, we could just kill you, put you out in the desert, nobody will ever find your body again. I mean, a lot of people use that terminology around where I live and live stuff like that. It's easy to get rid of people in the desert and stuff like that and everything. So, I mean, it isn't like today when there's whistles blowing. There wasn't even that. They wanted to keep things shut up, they just kill you. I just say it was suicide or car crash. Suicide, those three are the three most common used ones.
They just won World War II.
Yeah.
They're national heroes. And what they said, they immediately said it's a suicide. They followed up with a kind of investigation, which I read the transcript, most of it anyway, the Willicott's review, I think it's called. They actually interviewed the Navy corpsman who was on duty.
Uh-huh.
You'd think, this is your main guy. You got to really grill this guy. I think he was in for 15 minutes and gone.
Wow.
Thank you for your testimony, young man. You can go.
Whoa.
There was no investigation, no critical examination.
I believe Forrestal and JFK actually knew each other from the Marshall Plan much earlier. Actually, they had some interactions, which is interesting thread of history.
I'm not sure how much I knew about that.
Yeah,
so
George
I
Marshall
believe
was
it though.
one of them, I believe that. That's a different video.
It's so fascinating. Another Forrestal thread possibly related to UFOs is, I believe, one of his direct reports was Admiral Richard Byrd.
Yeah.
And so you have Operation High Jump.
Yeah, right. That would be Byrd, yeah.
In 46, and you have, off the coast or down the coast of Argentina, you have this big fleet of American ships going for... I don't really understand what the story is. It's a very weird.
It's kind of
story.
weird.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I believe the high jump thing. I think I don't.
Yeah.
Do you believe, when you say you believe the high jump thing, do you believe it was even a mission to begin with?
No, I think it was, but I don't believe they ran into basic Nazi
space
flying
laser
saucers,
Nazi flying saucer.
I don't think I do. No.
Yeah.
And because I remember I read Byrd's full statement that he gave, and if you really read the whole thing, I don't think he's really talking about flying saucers. There was a death, or more than one death, a couple. I mean, it's very difficult conditions down in Antarctica, so that's one thing. But my thing is if they were chased away by super advanced technology, well, a year and 2 years and 3 years later, we went back to Antarctica. It's not like we didn't go back there.
Right.
So maybe there are details that I'm missing, and I will fully look, if someone is able to show me a really strong case for it, I'll change my mind in a heartbeat. I'm not committed, but to thinking it's prosaic, but I just don't know that I'm convinced it's that they're into now.
Yeah, it's really spotty. It's I think he came back and he gave a speech, but it's unclear. The problem.
He said we're living in a new world now where from pole to pole, danger can come.
Right.
I'm paraphrasing probably badly, but he's talking about the fact that we have nuclear weapons and there will be delivery systems. Everyone knew it was all going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's smaller. We're living in a smaller world, in a dangerous world. I don't know that he was talking about aliens.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
You have
Oh, shit.
Choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the...
This is very helpful if you would focus on identification of sources. It is important that knowns and unknowns in the event of operation as a cover for intelligence programs.
The other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
You have Danny Sheehan in the audience here, the great Danny Sheehan, who's done incredible research around this. Do you think, you just actually did a great show on this on your podcast, do you think there is a connection between JFK's assassination and UFOs?
I do.
We just had an 80,000 document drop that was less helpful than, it's I'm more confused afterwards than going in. Like, I'd rather just listen to Danny on it.
I liken to JFK's murder to Agatha Christie's murder on the Orient Express, in which, spoiler alert, everyone killed the guy. There were more than one motive. There were many motives to assassinate President Kennedy. Many. He was a threat on.
Like I said, I've gone over this. People of mob that I know about as well have said it. People in intelligence while I'm dead, military, my father, other people. A lot of people don't know what some of us know from the inside. Some of us do. There's the mob, CIA, the military. There's FBI that's involved in it, CIA, brainwashing programs. All these people wanted JFK dead. The military-industrial complex wanted JFK dead. They wanted to keep wars, keep on going, and stuff like that. UFO stuff, I mean, there's some weird stuff with that, but they just did not like him, or he was a no man to not having these wars that the CIA military wanted to. You're talking about also the mob as well, where RFK and JFK owned the mob. They owned them. They helped get JFK elected. They would have lost the presidency if it wasn't for the mob. They helped to get elected. You don't get anything for free in the mob. Nothing for free in the mob. You owe the mob, you better pay up. Instead, they went against the mob, and they went after them full force. That's a no-no. That's where they, they get rid of your shelf here.
Every level you can imagine. My wife and I just rewatched JFK, Oliver Stone's great movie. Just like less than a month ago. Yeah. I'm really glad. Back and to the Left. Remember that. But that was a great movie. And see, he brought up the Vietnam connection, which I think is legit. Yeah. He also brought up Operation Mongoose. That's the whole Cuban operation. That's absolutely part of it.
Yeah, it is.
He didn't bring up some other things, like there's the whole Federal Reserve connection. Kennedy was a threat on that. And the whole nuclear connection, where I think that this was brought up in the movie, where Kennedy really was interested in a kind of a nuclear reduction and maybe disarmament to some extent. So Kennedy was the guy who made the mistake of thinking just because he's president that he was actually running the show. He goes up against this national security establishment that was like, no way, we're not going to let. They're not.
It's the cobble. It's national security stuff like that as well. They do not like it. They don't like the president. They could kill any president, national security council, and stuff like that. That owns, intelligence, the cabal, the secrets, and stuff like that. If you're not a part, you're not with them, they'll find ways using news against you, using media against you. They'll find other sources, non-governmental organizations, politicians. They'll find ways that you guys don't know about to undermine your presidency and to make it bad, really bad, painful nightmare and stuff like that. If you can't work with them, they'll find a way to out you, etc. Hold on.
Are like a traitor communist. That's how they saw him, and we're gonna have to kill you to protect this country. That's their rationalization. But the UFO subject, yes, this is, I think, absolutely must be brought into it. The interview that you're referring to is with a gentleman who's here. His name is Philip Lavelle, and he's a very good friend of ours. He's not a published author on JFK, but he knows that assassination as well as any person alive. No lie, and he's a great friend, and so we talked about it and about the potential UFO connection there, and he's on board with it.
JFK and the connection to the mob, as well as see the connection to the mob JFK's death, and Marilyn Monroe. The mob had Marilyn Monroe killed. JFK also did not like how Marilyn Monroe had secrets on JFK, RFK as well. She was murdered, but that was a mob hit and stuff like that. So,
well, I think he believes that this is absolutely.
Plus, she has secrets on the mob as well. She knew too much and everything. So,
part of the picture. You know, there was a memo JFK did sign on November 11th, so 11 days before he was assassinated. I think it was November 11th, wasn't it? Or the 12th? 12th, yeah, thank you. Where he's directing the Central Intelligence Agency to coordinate UFO data with the Soviet Union for laudable reasons, I would say. So that was part of his psyche right there. He was going against the system. You look at the majestic documents, which you referred to, and there's something called the so-called burned memo.
How can I forget this shit? How do I forget this shit? I look like a dumbass. I look like an idiot. I forgot about this. I'm glad. Just
where Lancer, and that was the
code name for Khrushchev. That's another reason why his assassination is because the generals did not want him. They did not want to end the Cold War. The military-industrial complex is about making money. They make money, including national security and intelligence makes money off the war machine, etc. They don't want peace and prosperity. They want death and destruction and everything. That's what makes the world go round for them, as well as how they make money. And they did not, want Khrushchev and, Kennedy to be getting along. They wanted Russia totally destroyed, and they also knew that with Khrushchev he could be removed. He could have been. He was removed. Khrushchev was removed. The Russians did not like Khrushchev working with Kennedy. He didn't last long. You have criminals, thugs, intelligence, military, etc., running the government, along with military leaders. Same with Russia. Over there, it's the same way. It's run by Kabul as well, with military leaders, etc. And they did not want a future where America and Russia was getting along. They did not want the wall to crack and fall and to break apart. And a lot of both sides found it beneficial for JFK to be killed. Russians did. It's a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger than anybody thinks that it is. They also were thinking about killing Khrushchev and stuff like that because he was a big threat.
Kennedy was described, I wish I could remember the exact wording of this, but an operation has to be done on him if he's too dangerous and it must be wet. And that refers to wet work, which is assassinations. So, and that was written shortly before the assassination. I can't remember the date of that. So, yeah, I mean, I think Kennedy, but I don't think it was only the UFO situation. I mean, John F. Kennedy is complex. There's a lot to see there. And as I mentioned Philip Lavelle, but the reason is Philip said, you talk to JFK researchers and they absolutely will not go there. They will not, even to this day, they will not want to talk about the UFO connection. You see this in all aspects of the alternative community. It's like, I'm already taking...
I forget about UFO stuff because of the mob and other people that talked about Marilyn Monroe. And there are people that weren't, that knew stuff about... I read this in the 80s. Different actors actresses talk about Marilyn Monroe, and they say that, there's some stuff they want to talk about. And Marilyn Monroe goes along with JFK and his assassination. It's all connected and stuff like that. Everybody, everything's connected here. All of this is. It is huge. But the people, they were scared to talk about what they knew about Marilyn Monroe and JFK. You had Dallas Police Department that withheld stuff. You had the FBI involved, keeping secrets on JFK about having a hole in here, putting a hole in his. I mean, I used to do all this investigative work on JFK, and how we heard about 3 shooters. This is all. I used to be also obsessed with JFK and everything, UFOs, all sort of stuff. My family said, "Stop doing it. It's ruining your life. Get away from it." This was 30-some years ago. 40. 30-some. About 30-some years ago. Was it 40? I don't know. It was a long time. But anyways.
And slings and arrows from the establishment for this. I don't want to talk. I don't want to wear this other albatross around my neck. But it is true. And the UFO phenomenon. Look, it is the elephant in the room of United States and world history of the 20th century. And all the academicians, all the mainstream historians and analysts, they ignore it over and over again. The first director of the CIA, Roscoe Hillenkotter, was into UFOs big time.
Yeah.
Why did none of the historians talk about this?
And he joined NICAP.
Yeah, he was a board member. Yeah. Until he resigned suddenly at the moment where, in 1962, Donald Kehoe, his friend, they were trying to get congressional hearings. It looked like it was going to happen. And a week later, Hillenkotter says, I'm out of NICAP. Look, the Air Force is doing everything they could. I think we should lay off.
Yeah.
And that was the end of that. So there's a story here that establishment historians ignored for years and years and years and years. It is the elephant in the room. If we do not understand the impact of the UFO or UAP phenomenon on world history, we're not going to understand a whole lot. We're going to miss a big part of the picture.
Reports of flying saucers are nothing new. From the beginning of recorded time, men have been seeing unexplainable things in the sky.
That's the history they want to keep away from you guys. How many, thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. They've been here forever. And it's like how in some of these depictions, they taught us how to use their space vehicles. In these days, these depictions, they're teaching us how to use them. This is like thousands of years ago. Mayans, and stuff like that. And tribal areas, different parts of the world, etc. ETs. This is, Smithsonian is also, destroying a lot of history, and they don't want the truth out either. And stuff like that, about how USA was founded way before Columbus founded, etc. So,
can we go rapid fire through some crashes?
Okay.
I just want to get a real or hoax.
Oh wow! All right, well, I'll see.
Okay, Roswell.
Oh, real.
Kingman.
Yes, real.
Kecksburg.
Yep. That's a good one. I don't believe it was the bell. Some people say it's the Galaka.
Okay.
Just because it looked like it superficially. First of all, the bell was not a flying device. It was.
Yeah, it was like some sort of torsion chamber thing.
Yeah.
High voltage electricity thing. It was.
And it probably did use rotating mercury.
Still there.
Like pressurized mercury and all of that, which is very important for electrogravitics, and you want to get an anti-gravitic lift.
Right.
Not my specialty. I should stop right there. But it was not a flying device by any means. According to the legend, Cook, I think, wrote about The Hunt for Zero Point. That's a really good book.
Yeah, amazing book.
That's a really good book, and he he broke this out a little over 20 years ago, and he said, according to, I think this was brought out in a post World War II trial of Nazis in Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia, where they talked about this, and the claim was like, you had a bunch of scientists, like 60, a bunch of them died from the effects of this, and then the rest were executed at the end of the war so they wouldn't talk.
Yeah.
That's the story.
The deglocket thing is fascinating because you see a rig there now where maybe like a bell-shaped thing. What I mean, it looks like that shape. It's really fascinating. And then I think he's also documented through this Polish journalist Igor Witkowski, who documented that Ernest Grauwitz, who was basically this SS medical chief who worked directly with Joseph Mengele, and another guy named Walter Gerlach, who is a gravitational expert in physics. We're working on this project, and so you have a gravity guy, and then you have a guy working with like biological, specimens doing. And we know the Nazis did like experimental cell block 9, like they were doing weird stuff.
They were doing a lot of like off the mainstream of physics.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, they really were. So there's I love hearing you talk about this. Back to Kecksburg, I guess I'll just say there's something very bizarre came down there, and I don't think it was a Soviet satellite. I do not believe that. I do not believe that at all. There's Stan Gordon, who's still around. I love Stan. He's really dove into this, and I think he's got the goods on it. There was a local radio station guy, I think Frank Murphy was his name. He goes in there, it wrecked his life. It destroyed his life on many levels. Anyway, so Kecksburg, I don't know what that was. I think it was important. It wasn't just a satellite, and maybe it was something more. Maybe it was a craft.
I don't know. I have a weird one for you. Aztec.
Oh, I'm on the Aztec train. I believe that one. Aztec was the first case that was written about.
Yeah.
In 1950, and it was viciously smeared and debunked.
Yeah.
A couple of years after that, by a guy named Considine. I think that was the one.
J.P. Kahn.
Oh, J.P. Kahn. Thank you. I'm getting all of my people mix up. It gets tough to be an older man.
Well, you know
days.
A lot of stuff, man. That you
yeah, J.P. Kahn and but this story, I have two very dear, wonderful people, Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, who've really done the work on this. But they revived and resuscitated this case, and what they showed was that Kahn's expose was utterly mendacious and just driven by resentment over not being allowed to do the story.
Yeah, he was going to break
with Scully to begin with,
and he lost it to Scully, and then it was kind of this pit. Yeah. And then the other weirder thread is he was family friends with J. Edgar Hoover as well.
Oh yeah, I heard
J.P.
that.
Kahn.
I did hear.
So,
that.
and then you have these FBI files on Silas Newton and Gebauer,
right,
going way back to the I think the 30s or something, and they're totally redacted. Like, so it's like, why would you have these crazy FBI files?
This whole thing of smearing them as these shysters, sleazy real estate investors. That's not. I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm just going to give a shout out to Richard Geldreich, who I love his research, and I talk with him, and he's got stuff on this.
Yeah.
He's going to come out with more information.
Amazing. Well, would love to hear from him. Silas Newton was worth $20 million at the time.
Yeah,
which adjust for inflation, like it's like that guy doesn't need to hustle people on a doodlebug oil thing.
No,
like, he was very successful.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think Aztec was real. I think that actually did happen. Unfortunately, with a lot of these crash retrievals, Roswell was the anomaly.
Yeah.
In the sense that because Roswell made the newspaper at the time, and so it was harder. Like they buried it right away.
Yeah.
But there were always researchers like, oh, remember that newspaper headline?
Yeah.
Like, so it was always kind of there. And then it wasn't until the late 1970s that a few people, especially like the great late Leonard Stringfield, you asked in the beginning, like, who are some of my heroes?
Yeah.
He's one.
Yeah.
I never met the guy.
Yeah.
He was amazing. Amazing. But anyway, so Stringfield starts collecting and dredging up these, and he was one of the first people to interview and publish his interview with Jesse Marcel Sr. And by the time that happened, you're really looking 30 years after Roswell. So those people, a lot of them were still around. Some were gone. And researchers kind of jumped in. and they found many people. Like in the case with Aztec, it just didn't work out that way. Kingman, you mentioned that before. I just want to say that there's no question in my mind that Kingman was the real thing. Raymond Fowler, still alive, in his 90s, I think, was involved in contacting the primary witness of that. And so I think there's some good information on Kingman. But the problem with all of those other cases is, compared to Roswell, we have like a small fraction of the number of people to be able to talk to, and that makes it tough for them.
It shows you how managed this subject could have been in the Cold War secrecy era too, because with Roswell, nobody really knew about Roswell until 1979, 1980.
That's right.
Friedman helped popularize it. Jesse Marcel came out.
Yeah.
But between 47 and that time, it was not in any of the UFO books.
Not only that, yes. So the UFO, this applies to us today in our community, and in the early decades of the flying saucers. So it was really not an easy career move to write and study flying saucers or UFOs. Bad career move for the most part. Yeah. So everyone stayed away from it. And so the people who were in it were often like hyper conservative in a way. It was very surprising. So like abductions, like no way, they're not going to get into abductions. That's crazy talk. You're talking crazy talk. Crash retrievals of UFOs, keep that away.
Yeah.
They would, and they'd been scared off of it by the J.P. Kahn hit piece, certainly. Despite the fact that, how is it illogical that with all of these flying discs, the United States military might have gotten one?
Yeah.
It's really not that illogical when you think about it. But it was absolutely off the limits. And when Stanton Friedman and Stringfield and others started looking at these crash retrievals in the late 70s, they got a lot of pushback from established, UFO researchers at that time. This was not an easy sell.
It's still not. I mean, if you Google
That's right.
Aztec crash, it goes Aztec crash hoax. That is the Wikipedia page of this thing. And you have Scott and Suzanne Ramsey.
That's not UFO researchers managing those pages, of course. Those are hardcore skeptical organization.
But then you give them first principles points as to why actually maybe something did happen at the time. And there's never anything to say back. They always go, well, it's been well established that it's a hoax. And it's like, that is just received wisdom. You're literally just repeating some party line. You've done zero research.
No, I think Aztec really, that was the real deal.
I agree. I've been there, and I've been there with Scott and Suzanne. And you see the trees have been, where the UFO is dragged out, you see that the trees are like, have been bent over in this awkward shape. You have FBI files of the two guys who reported on it, through Scully or whatever, going back to the 30s. So they were clearly kind of tracking these guys, which is, really strange. They were Newton was thrown in jail over this. I think there's a lot. And then Scully, people say with Scully, it was like written in this sort of flowery, artful way or whatever. But he was the guy a lot of celebrities would go to give really kind of... to tell stories where, they didn't want everything out necessarily. They wanted it told in a delicate way.
Yeah.
But he was approached by this possibly consortium of scientists that were kind of, consolidated into Dr. G or whatever.
Yeah.
And it would make sense that he would have been approached. And you have all these people mysteriously dying around Scully. You have Carl Flock, who's probably a three-letter agency guy.
I knew Carl Flock.
So it's like you do a little digging.
Other thing about Scully.
Yeah.
You read that book. Read just like the introduction.
Yeah.
If nothing else. 1950. This is a guy who really knew things really well. He was deeply skeptical.
Yes.
Of the United States establishment in the military.
Yes.
Which is an unusual thing for a journalist in 1950.
Yes.
Scully was no one's fool. He knew things really well. I would recommend anyone find the book. Just read that.
Yeah.
It reads about as fresh today as when he wrote it back.
I agree. And you have recording of Silas Newton speaking at the University of Denver or some Colorado or something. And so there's so much documentation from the time, but as soon as you say this is a hoax, people just kind of look away and forget about it.
Yeah. Well, because again, the whole thing about being in a fringe field like this, it's like the last thing you want to appear is gullible.
Right.
It's like that's the kiss of death. Like, you don't look like you're stupid. I'm going to believe every single thing. And so there's this overcompensation that has always happened in this field.
Yes.
Which is too bad because let's face it, let's get down to the fundamental reality here. We are dealing with a phenomenon that is beyond us. It is a reality-shattering phenomenon.
Yes.
And it breaks everything.
Yeah.
It breaks absolutely everything. And the reality is that it's not that we're being too crazy and too fringe. We're not going out there enough.
I think that's right.
That's the thing. This is a very, it's a very powerful subject in reality. UFOs, UAP, whatever we want to call them. But even more than that, like UFOs or UAP, that doesn't really even touch.
That's right.
That's nothing.
Yeah.
The truth is there is an other intelligence, society, civilization, whatever they are. They're here. They are established. They have bases. They have a presence. They are global every day.
The nationwide sightings of mysterious drones.
Weeks of mysterious drone sightings.
You're telling me we don't know what the hell these drones are in New Jersey are?
Can you make sense of the Jersey drones? I know you covered these in various contexts. It's so confusing. You have, Rogan and Sean Ryan being like, they're looking for loose nuclear material on the eastern seaboard. You have other people saying, we found some Chinese nationals like around there. And then I think there's a lot of reason to believe there was possibly genuine anomalous aerial stuff going on.
Yeah, everyone's always like, I've solved it. Like, everyone's like figured this thing out. But really, the thing that strikes me about the mystery drone phenomenon was it's like every single other UFO wave you ever studied. In other words, this thing happens. No one seems to be able to explain it. Everyone's got their own theory. Thousands of theories are out there. And then it goes away and you have no resolution. No resolution. Well, join the club. This has been going on for many, many years. There's still a lot of unknown things about this that I would like to get more information about, and I don't know if we ever will. The reports of these things supposedly coming out of the water and harassing U.S. Coast Guard vessels. That's one. It was apparently a swarm that supposedly came from the ocean, out of the ocean. Do we know? I don't know. But it swarmed a Coast Guard vessel.
And you have Trump saying it came from a garage, and it's a very strange place. Biden knows where they're coming from.
Our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage,
they do. They do know. I mean, when Trump shut his mouth over it and everything like that, he's just as much of a liar as the other presidents are. I just have no respect for that bullshit whatsoever. Both sides are just corrupt criminals.
Go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. I can't imagine it's the enemy, because if it was the enemy, they'd blast it out. Even if they were late, they'd blast it. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should.
With Trump, it's always hard to know because he speaks in such a overly simplistic, sing-songy way where it's like, dude, I don't know what you're saying. But, what do you...
It's entertaining, but,
It is entertaining. But there's sorts that seem to imply something kind of anomalous, right?
I don't really know if Donald Trump actually knew what these were. I mean, presumably after he became president, he might have figured out. And by the way, notice... the Trump and Biden teams, they hate each other, and yet when they talk about this phenomenon, they sound exactly the same.
Yeah, that's right. It's the only
no difference.
It's the only thing that gets like AOC and Matt Gaetz to agree, and then simultaneously like the power structures that are clamping down to agree.
They build high doors to keep it all secret, and they should all be swimming with the fishes down the ocean floor and everything, because both sides are pieces of shit for keeping this a secret. And that's what they're doing. They have no intention of putting the truth out. That's why we have to put the truth out and everything. We need to be a threat to them. Because if we don't force this out, then it's all going to get buried. All this is going to get buried. The truth will get buried. That's what they want. That's why they have this shit, classified behind closed doors. Because you're all pieces of shit and everything. Anyways, I've gone over my time. I've done this long enough. Take care. Peace out. I watched a little bit more, but I only did this for the other people could say something